Shalom, shalom. First and foremost, I have to give all praise and glory to Yahweh, by Hashem Yahushua, by Hashem Rakakwadash. Yahweh be the true and only cause God, by Hashem in the name of, and Yahushua being the true Lord and Savior and only cause Jesus, and the Rakakwadash being the Holy Spirit. Double honors to apostles and others, a great millstone, that rule well and worthy double honors. And peace and blessings to all select out there, push the work of the Lord in true faith, sincerity, and present their body as a living sacrifice. Shalom, Paul as well. This is your brother Mashah, and today's edification exhortation. In this lesson, we're basically going over how, it's very important to be constantly evolving in this thing. Constantly evolving, man. You know what I'm saying? And, I got inspiration to do this lesson, from, just meditating on, you know, certain things and just really comparing myself, to, others. Sometimes comparison is not always a bad thing because sometimes through comparison you're able to, examine like what you need to work on, if you use it wisely, But what I've been noticing lately, me compared to other people, is that even in the world, a lot of people, who I used to deal with, they would just stay on the same level, man. Like even me being in the truth now, and through, the spirit of the Lord, I was able to become a way better man, to the point that I'm unrecognizable to people who I used to, deal with in the world. But when I, so like, there'll be instances where I run into these people, from the past, and they might not recognize me, but I completely recognize them. Why? Because they're the same. They're the exact same. And I'm like, damn, bro, like it's been years and you're still that same person, we were when we were kids, etc. You know what I'm saying? So it goes to show, man, like a lot of people stay the same, and that's not a good thing, man. You can't stay the same. It's important to constantly evolve, especially if you're a person who, is about self-improvement and stuff like that. You can't be the same, man. You can't be the same. It's very dangerous to be the same person you are and never change, man. You know, because there's gonna be adaptations that have to be made. You're gonna have to, adapt to different changes, man. You know, and like, yeah, man, like we have to understand that everything evolves, man. Everything evolves, everything changes, man. Over time. You know, and spiritually, and it's truth too, man. Like you gotta be constantly evolving, man, because times change, and also, man, like the Lord is gonna put you in different, situations where you're gonna have to adapt, or if you don't, then you're gonna fall off. And that's where stumbling blocks come into place. A lot of times the Lord will, have certain stumbling blocks, in the way to really see who his chosens are, man. You know what I'm saying? But, now, let's go into the word evolution, man. Let's actually go into the etymology of the word evolution. Because a lot of times, when people hear the word evolution, they think of, the biological, phrase, which is, you know, they'll think evolution, people come from apes and stuff like that, but not. But in the context, I'm using the word evolution. It talks about change, man. That's basically what evolution is. But it's popularized by, Darwin's theory, which we know is going off. That's a topic for another time. But, when we actually go into the etymology of the word, evolution, it actually comes from a Latin word, which means, which is evolutio, evolutio, which means unrolling. This term is derived from the verb evolver, meaning to unroll, unfold, or develop. The concept originally referred to the unrolling of a scroll or a book and over time, you know? So, yeah, man, like the word, evolution, man, when you go into etymology, it means to unroll, it means to unfold or to develop, man. And let's actually go into the definition of unfold. Unfold, to open or spread out from a folded position, to open or spread out from a folded position, man. So it's literally, man, like, you're literally spreading, something out, man. Something that's folded, something that's folded, stays in the same position. You know what I'm saying? It stays intact, it stays stagnant. You know what I'm saying? But the word evolution, it means to unfold, man. You know what I'm saying? It means to unfold, referred to the unrolling of a scroll or a book and over time. And that's spiritual because, we have to constantly, you know, you know, expand ourselves, man, spread ourselves, pause, no diddy. But you have to constantly expand ourselves, man, expand our arsenal, you know? And it's spiritual that it's talking about books because, we're prophets, man. So, if you think about it in the kingdom, if the prophets of old had their own books, you know what I'm saying? The book of Matthew, the book of, First Peter, etc., First Timothy, whatever. Don't you think we're gonna have, our own books also? Yeah, we will, man. You know what I'm saying? So, if there's evolution in books, even when you go into the scriptures, when you go from the Old Testament to the New Testament, there's constant evolution, man. You know what I'm saying? So what it might mean a certain thing in the Old Testament, that doesn't mean it's going to mean the same thing in the New Testament. You know what I'm saying? So there's constant, evolution, man. You know what I'm saying? Over time, So if you're a man that's, constantly evolving, in this truth, as a man in general, you are, expanding yourself, man. You are not staying the same. You're constantly expanding yourself, man. So expanding yourself, man, means you have to get out of position, and it's an uncomfortable thing. It's like you're stretching. If you haven't stretched for a long time, of course it's gonna be tight. You know what I'm saying? Of course your body's gonna be tight and it's gonna feel uncomfortable because you're expanding. You know what I'm saying? Your body, because your body's been in such of a static state. You know what I'm saying, that you're not able to be as flexible. You're not as able to adapt, man. You know what I'm saying? So in evolution, man, comes with being flexible, whether it be physically, but most importantly, mentally. You know what I'm saying? You have to be mentally flexible, man, in order to truly evolve. You know what I'm saying? You got to be able to put off the old man. You know what I'm saying? Even coming to the truth, coming from being in the world to being a prophet, you have to evolve yourself, man. You have to expand yourself. You have to unfold yourself, man. Uncoil yourself, man. So yeah, man. And also, man, like we have to understand that, constant evolution, man, is essential in all facets, man. Whether it be, for, survival, growth, and even relevance. Relevance, across all domains, man. It could range from, biology, to business, to even personal, development. Because at the end of the day, it's the process of continuous adaptation and improvement, in the response, to basically, a constantly changing environment. You know what I'm saying? When the environment's, constantly changing, that adaptation, man, that evolution is very important. in order for survival. You know what I'm saying? You know? Because at the end of the day, stagnation, man, stagnation, or basically, in other words, the failure to evolve, inevitably, leads to irrelevance, or extinction, man. You know what I'm saying? So you have to understand that, change, is, changes in the environment, etc., and anything is inevitable, man. That means it's gonna happen no matter what. So you got to be willing to adapt. And if you're not able to adapt, man, and you stay stagnant, man, or you basically fail to evolve, fail to change, and adapt to the environments, you're gonna become extinct, man. There's a thing in biology called the survival of the fittest, man. If you're familiar with that, I think everybody's familiar with the term survival of the fittest. You have to understand that the strong survives. Only the strong survives, man. So if you look at it from a spiritual, light, the word extinction, you have to, look at it kind of like in the truth. We have to understand this truth is like a competition, just like how life is. We have to be the ones, this is basically survival, man. We're fighting, this is a life or death situation, man, whether, you can see it or not, man. This is really a life or death situation. Because, through the, by doing the work of the Lord, being a man of the Lord, following the Lord, you're able to be preserved in the times to come. So, you gotta, continue to, do the work, man, and sometimes, the Lord will have it to certain things, put certain things in your path, that's gonna force you to change, force you to evolve, force you to change, because if you stay the same, that's when you lose, man. Because you gotta think about it kind of like a fight. If you fight a person, right? A boxer might fight a person. They're in a ring, they beat that person. And then what the boxer that lost, ultimately figured out that, that person who beat him loves, that right hook, that right jab. So once he figures out, that right hook is gonna come, that person's gonna adapt and beat that person. Because if not, if he doesn't adapt to that way of fighting, and doesn't improve his defense, he's gonna lose. And that's the same thing, man. You gotta look at this thing as a fight, and it is a fight. The scriptures call it the good fight of faith. So in order to win a fight, you have to adapt to your opponent. You have to adapt to your opponent, and you have to ultimately, have defense, man, because defense, Salah, it's the offense, man. You gotta have great offense, man. You gotta be able to adapt to what the defense, is giving you, man. Because you have to understand the defense is smart, the Lord, is smart as hell, man. If the Lord sees, this thing is not really, affecting you as much, and it becomes easy for you, Lord is gonna amp up the level, man. And make it harder for you, so you can really see your value, man. Because at the end of the day, as gold is tried in the fire, it's so, is, acceptable, man, in the furnace of adversity, man. So the Lord's going to consistently try you, and if you're not able to pass the test and you're weak, then you're going to become extinct, man. And that's when you fall out the truth. You spiritually become extinct, And also, man, like, even if you look at it, from like a pop cultural, perspective, or anything like that, if you stay stagnant, man, even a celebrity, or even an athlete, but let's talk about, celebrities like musicians, for example. You know, if a musician, what I'm saying, it could be your favorite musician, your favorite rapper. Look at Drake, for example. Drake, the reason why Drake, is so great and he's able to, you know, still make music for decades, what I'm saying, and just be great at what he does. Why? It's because he's able to adapt to change. He's hip. What I'm saying? He's always, doing the new trend so he can stay relevant, man, because if he had stayed stagnant, man, what I'm saying? If he had stayed the same level, he would have lost his relevancy, man. No one would have cared about Drake anymore because you have to understand, it's human psychology, man. What I'm saying? To, lose interest, in something that is repeated, man. What I'm saying? Yeah, you might like it, man. What I'm saying? But the more you eat something, man, it could be like your favorite food. If you keep eating that thing every day for the rest of your life, you're gonna grow to dislike it, man, because there's a saying that familiarity breeds contempt. So the more familiar you are with something, the more respect, you tend to lose for it, whether you acknowledge it or not, whether you're consciously aware of it, you know? So if Drake, for example, if your favorite artist, didn't evolve, what I'm saying, you have a lot of niggas be like, oh, I miss the old Drake, or I miss this old version of this rapper, what I'm saying, or I miss this old version of this actor. If that 9 times out of 10, 99, there's a 99% chance if that person, that entertainer stayed the same level, man, what I'm saying, you would not like that person anymore because you would get bored of it, man. And it's the same thing, man. What I'm saying, and it's truth. What I'm saying, if you're not evolving and you're staying the same way, man, you're gonna lose relevance, man. What I'm saying? You're gonna lose relevance, And sometimes that happens with the older generations, man. A lot of times the older generations, are not able to adapt, And even in the truth, it's crazy that I remember Elder Gabar bringing up his testimony of him, describing the Cornelius, situation. Because when the Lord revealed to them that Cornelius was a Jake, it actually caused uproar and it actually caused division in the One West camp, man. A lot of people, couldn't, evolve, what I'm saying, and adapt to the changes, man, that the Lord put through his spirit. So a lot of men fell out, what I'm saying, and Gabar even said that one man, who fell out the truth, what I'm saying, I had actually told him, man, that why can't, we stay the same, man? Why can't it all just be the same like it was? What I'm saying? Why can't Cornelius remain an Edomite? Stuff like that, because he wanted to stay stagnant. What I'm saying? But at the end of the day, change is inevitable, man. Change is gonna happen no matter what. And if you're not willing to accept change, that's when you become extinct, man. That's when you become no longer relevant, man. What I'm saying? So evolution, man, is an important part of everything, man. What I'm saying? Everything constantly changes, man. And that's why the elders, man, are really great and are really, 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 man, sincere and worthy of double honors because they adapted, man. When YouTube came out, what I'm saying, they adapted, man. What I'm saying? When the internet, they learned how to use the internet, man. The unicorn to, prophesy this word in the four corners of the earth, man. They adapted, man. And that's rare in the older generation, man. A lot of times, there's conflict, between the older generation and the new generation, because there's times where the old generation fails to adapt, man. To the new trends at hand. So, and also, that takes humility, man. What I'm saying, and that goes to show how humble, the elders and apostles, starting with, elders, apostles of great millstones, man, how humble and sincere these men are. They're willing to put their pride aside and adapt, and that's why, they're still relevant. That's why, they're still surviving in this thing, man, because of constant change. Whenever the Spirit told them, to change a thing, man, they did it. You know what I'm saying? Even the elders of Great Millstone, when they were in One West, they actually, the Spirit of the Lord was on them to leave that camp, man. You know what I'm saying? Even when the year 2000 came, in One West, the older generation, they actually thought, the Lord would come back, in the year 2000. But when that didn't happen, that's when a lot of men fell out the truth. You know what I'm saying? A lot of people who were deemed as sincere, that the elders claimed, they fell out the truth because they weren't able to handle change. You know what I'm saying? So that's what separates the good from the great. The great is going to constantly evolve while the average and mediocre stay the same. And that's why you see a lot of average or mediocre people, they fall off. It could even be in the music industry. You know what I'm saying? It could be, entertainment. It could be in athletics, basketball, football. You know what I'm saying? A lot of the mediocre people, they might have a 3-year stunt. You know what I'm saying? A 5-year stunt, whatever, 10-year stunt. But once the game evolves, now niggas is taking 3-pointers. You know what I'm saying? Now guards are getting bigger. If you can't, evolve, that's when you're out of the league. You know what I'm saying? That's when you no longer see people on NBA rosters or NFL rosters anymore because they fail to adapt. They still got an old school game, So it's the same thing in this truth, man. If you're not constantly adapting, man, you will become extinct, man. You can't be the same level you were last year. You can't even be the same level you were yesterday. Because every day we're learning. You should have it in mind to get 1% better every single day, man. You shouldn't be the same man you were when you first came to the truth, man. You should be a whole completely different person, man. You should constantly be evolving every day, man. You know what I'm saying? Even clothes evolves, Niggas used to wear, skinny jeans. Now niggas are wearing baggy jeans. You know what I'm saying? So everything, comes back, man. You know what I'm saying? There's nothing new under the sun. You know what I'm saying? But at the end of the day, still, things are remixed. Things are not going to be exactly the same, but, things will be remixed. It'll be slightly different, but things will be similar, man. So it's like, you got to be able to evolve, man, in this thing, especially in this truth, because if not, that's when you become bugged out, man. That's when you fall out because you can't keep up, man. You know what I'm saying? Only the fittest survive, man. Only the fittest survive, man. Niggas will say Mother Nature, and stuff like that. But shit, man, like, you gotta really look at this thing, man, as a fight. If you can't adapt, man, to the punches, to adversity, you're not gonna, improve, man. You're just gonna stay the same, and then no one's gonna take you seriously. You feel me? You have to understand, like, even from the human eye, we like change, man. You know what I'm saying? No brother wants to, it's in our spirit not to deal with only one woman, man. We want to deal with a bunch of women, not different flavors and stuff. You know what I'm saying? So, how you think the Lord, the Lord is salt, man. The Lord has the same mind, man. You think the Lord is going to keep putting you through the same thing? No, man, because that would be too easy. How would you know one's value without adversity, man? Ask yourself that, man. That's why a lot of people, when adversity comes, they're revealed, because anybody can do, good, in the beginning of the fight, but it's the last minute in the round, the last round, anybody can have a good fight, man, the first 2 rounds, but when it's the last round, you know what I'm saying, and you tired and all that, man, like, is you gonna give up or are you gonna adapt, man? You know what I'm saying? You know, and that's the mentality you gotta have, man, in this faith, man. You know, because if not, if you don't adapt, you know what I'm saying, you don't adapt to change, you know what I'm saying, you will get knocked out. You know what I'm saying? You will get spiritually knocked out, man. You know what I'm saying? Or even spiritually knocked out. I mean, Salak, I said the same word twice, but you know, physically knocked out too, man. You know, even when it comes to physically too, man. Like, you know, you gotta know that the same things you were eating, you know, when you were young, you can't eat those same things, you know, when you get older, man. You gotta make sure you're adapting. You know, even the elders, man, the elders are really a prime example of evolution, because they started this truth with black beards. Now they got gray, white beards, man. You know what I'm saying? And, you know, the elders and stuff, you know, are very into, you know, health and wellness, man. You know, you got to understand, as the more you get seasoned in something, you know what I'm saying, the less things, you know what I'm saying, you can do. You know what I'm saying? You know, even if you look at LeBron, for example, LeBron is a great example. LeBron is a master of longevity, and you got to look at the elders, man, as like spiritual LeBrons. You know what I'm saying? Just be, you know, LeBron's in like year 23, year 22. You know what I'm saying? And he's still playing at an all-star, superstar level. Why? Because he's constantly evolving. He's taking care of his body. You know what I'm saying? He's adapting to the new game. You know what I'm saying? Of course, he lost his athleticism, but still, that's where he started, you know, learning that less is more, and he started improving his skill set, you know, which allowed him to still stay, you know, playing at an all-star level, you know, a superstar level. And, you know, spiritually, that's the same thing the elders are doing. You know, the elders know that they're the leaders, man. So they got to make sure they're taking care of their health, man. They can't be eating junk food and all that, man. You know what I'm saying? They got to make sure they have a good diet, you know, so they can have that longevity, man. You know, longevity is really the word that I'm looking for, man, that I was looking for. You know, in order to really have longevity, you know, you got to be able to evolve, you know, because things are going to change, man. You know, your body changes. You know, you get older. You know what I'm saying? The same thing, the way you were moving when you were young, you can't do that. You know, you can't move the same. Some people are blessed enough to still move the same way. But most of the time, man, you know, you're gonna come to a point where your body's not gonna be the same anymore. And what are you gonna do? Give up? No, you're gonna have to evolve. You know what I'm saying? You be seeing these old people, you know, they be in the gym and all that, man, you know, because they know that in order for them to, you know, not become extinct or even die, you know what I'm saying, they gotta, you know what I'm saying, you know, make sure they're up to par. Everything's up to par, man, you know, because there's a saying, man, if you don't use it, you lose it, man, you know. So this is why, you know, the Lord puts us through so much things, man, so we can know our value, and also as practice. You know what I'm saying? So when the times do come, that our temptation does come, we'll be able to adapt perfectly fine, because we've been practicing the art of adapting, man. You know what I'm saying? So, you know, that's something you gotta have in mind, man. You gotta examine yourself daily. The scriptures say examine yourselves daily, man. You gotta look yourself in the mirror, you know, even if everything seems like okay. If you're really great, you're gonna realize it's the little things, man. It's the little things. You know, the scriptures even say a little leaveneth the whole bread. You know, even a little bad habit can transform into something huge and detrimental to you. So this is why it's important to take accountability and examine yourself, man. You know, you gotta, you know, look yourself in the mirror and be like, damn, I gotta work on this. You know what I'm saying? Because you have to understand, you know, nothing is guaranteed. You know, your health is not guaranteed. You know what I'm saying? And most importantly, and it's true, the spirit is not guaranteed. So if you're not willing to adapt, you know what I'm saying, most importantly to the spirit and what the spirit tells you, you know what I'm saying, you're not going to survive in this thing, man, you know? So there has to be constant evolution, man, you know? There has to be constant evolution. You know, sometimes you may have to have, you know, certain, you know, physical indicators of your evolution, you know? You might be a brother, you know what I'm saying, who had short hair, for example. Or like, yeah, if you look at Kobe, man, you know, when Kobe was young, he had the afro. You know what I'm saying? We knew that version of Afro Kobe. You know what I'm saying? Then he went bald. You know what I'm saying? You know? So little stuff like that. You know, obviously you don't have to go bald or anything like that, you know, willingly, which is going off. But, you know, sometimes you gotta have certain markers to show your evolution. Like for me, for example, you know, I'm a brother who, you know, recently just got earrings, you know, but the earrings is very, you know, symbolic, you know what I'm saying, because, you know, it shows my evolution. Ultimately, you know, the reason why I got it is because, you know, in order for me to, you know, heal, you know, I have to go through pain. I have to accept pain. I have to adapt to pain, you know, and accept change, you know. And then the type of earring I got is, you know, a diamond earring, you know, because, you know, pressure makes diamonds. So you got to have certain things, you know, that show your evolution. It could even be your look, you know what I'm saying? You know, the way you dress, or, you know, you got to be constantly evolving, man, you know, because, you know, obviously it starts off internal, but, you know, you have to understand that the internal ultimately manifests to the external, man. You know, so you can't be having the same look forever, man. You know what I'm saying? You got to know how to adapt, you know. But if the spirit is truly dealing with you, you're going to adapt, man, whether you realize it or not, you know. But also, man, you know, put yourselves in situations where you have to adapt. You might have been a brother that, you know, didn't have much hair. You know, grow your hair out. You know what I'm saying? Or you a brother that probably had hair. You know, maybe, you know, to show a next chapter, you know what I'm saying, in your life, why don't you go with the low cut? You know, little things like that, man. You know what I'm saying, where you put yourself in like an uncomfortable situation really shows growth, because growth only comes through pain. You know what I'm saying? You know, even when it comes to even working out too. You know, sometimes in working out and stuff, you can actually plateau. You know, a lot of people have the misconception, even when working out, for instance, like, you know, push-ups. They think, oh, if I do 100 push-ups every day, I'm just going to become muscular. Nah, because even if you do 100 push-ups every day, your body over time is going to get used to the stress that you're putting on your body, and you're not going to have as much gains because your body has already become habituated. So the only way you can grow muscles is by, you know, change, man. You know, altering your workouts, you know. Yeah, even doing the same push-up over and over again. Your body's going to get used to it, so you got to have different variations, you know. You got to have different variations. You know, you could change even the pace too. You know, you're probably going fast. Sometimes you got to slow it down so it can target different muscles, you know. Or even when it comes to lifting weights. If you're lifting 20 pounds or 30 pounds, you know what I'm saying, you keep doing it over and over again, eventually your body's going to get used to it, you know, and you're not going to see as much gains or improvement because you plateaued. So you got to constantly be improving. You got to constantly increase the weight. And that's the same thing in this truth too. You know, you might have been a brother where, you know, you only posted, like a couple videos a week. For instance, you post like three lessons a week. You know what I'm saying? Sometimes when that comes too easy, now you gotta post 4 lessons a week. You know, then it turns into you posting, you know, a lesson every day of the week. You know, then if posting 1 lesson every day is too easy, then that's when you start posting two lessons a day, 3 lessons a day, 4 lessons a day. You should be constantly trying to max yourself out, man. because, you know, nobody's perfect, man. You know what I'm saying? Nobody's perfect, you know? You might be really good, but are you perfect? No. So at the end of the day, we're constantly learning, man. Even when it comes to the precepts. You know what I'm saying? Just because you know a couple breakdowns and stuff like that, there's still more to learn, man. Every day I read the scriptures, you know what I'm saying? There's always a new scripture. I'm like, dang, bro, like, that's a scripture. I always discover a new scripture every day, man. You know what I'm saying? So you got to constantly learn, man. Don't stay stagnant in this thing, man. Just because you know how to break down Revelations, the 13th chapter, just because you know how to break down Deuteronomy 28, that doesn't mean you know it all, man. There's still more to learn, man. And it's not only just learning the scriptures too, it's also learning how to apply the scriptures to your real life. That's a very important thing. That's evolution too, because at first you start with a student, you start off as a student, but then after mastering that student level, even though you never really master being a student, because you're constantly learning every day, but eventually you have to transition into being a teacher. Even the elders at one point were once students, and they had a person that they were learning from. You know what I'm saying? But the spirit, was on them to become teachers, man. You know what I'm saying? So you got to constantly evolve, man. You know what I'm saying? Sometimes even it's not only just necessarily self-improvement or, self-change, but also the Lord might have it to where you have to physically change even your location. The Lord might have a spirit on you or another brother, to move to a different state. And you got to trust the spirit, man. Yeah, it may be uncomfortable. You may not be familiar, with the city. But at the end of the day, the more you do something, the more you get exposed to something, the more you get, used to it, man. And I've had it to where, like, I'm trying to constantly evolve. One of my goals is to try to face all my fears. One of my fears is heights. And I've actually been doing a lot of exposure therapy, going on rides, at amusement parks and stuff like that to overcome my fear, because, to evolve, you have to be, willing to change, man. If not, you could become extinct. You become stagnant, man. And with stagnation comes, you being extinct, like I read earlier, man. Man, so you got to be constantly spreading yourself out, man. Spreading yourself out. You can't stay the same. You can't remain folded. You got to unfold yourself, man. You got to spread yourself out. Pause. You know what I'm saying? But, you got to constantly evolve, man. Every great person, every great figure in history, they always evolved, man. The people who stayed the same are always the people who fell off. So don't be like them, man. Keep the faith. You know what I'm saying? Lord willing, you are the fire to give all praise, honor, and glory to Yahweh, man. Evolving, is very necessary in this thing, man. Keep evolving, keep improving every day. Keep the faith, man. Survival of the fittest, man. Only the strong survive. Shalom, blah, blah, blah. Death to America.